Little MAGA girl's GoFundMe hacked by Leftist, but WWII veteran suddenly appeared and said, "Subscribe to the channel right now to find out the end of this epic story and comment below which part of this great America you are watching from." The computer lab at the Oakville Community Center, usually a place of monotonous hums and keyboard clicks, had transformed into a chamber of psychological torture. The air conditioning was blasted to the max, creating an artificial chill that penetrated the bones. But it wasn't the cold that made Anne, our little MAGA girl, shiver uncontrollably on the waxed linoleum floor. It was fear, a visceral, primal fear, the kind you feel when you realize you are alone against a force that doesn't just despise you, but desires your complete erasure. Anne was only 14. Her frame was delicate, an image of fragility accentuated by the pink tulle skirt she wore, now splayed around her like the petals of a trampled flower. But what defined Anne in that moment, what made her a target in that sterile room, was the white t-shirt she wore with such pride. In black letters, simple and direct, it read, "Trump." To her, that name wasn't just politics. It was a heritage, a connection to the values her parents taught her at the dinner table: God, family, and country. And it was the symbol of a pure patriotism that believed in American greatness and the honor of its heroes. But in that room, under the merciless glare of fluorescent lights, her faith was being tested by the fire of humiliation. She was collapsed, her knees scraped against the hard floor, her face contorted in a scream that seemed soundless, stifled by the oppression of the environment. Her blue eyes, usually full of a youthful, hopeful shine, were now flooded with hot tears that streamed down, mixing with confusion and panic. Around her, rows of old computer monitors, their beige casings yellowed by time, displayed the cruel verdict of her defeat. On every screen, replicated dozens of times, like a visual echo of her failure, glowed the cold, impersonal digital message. $0 raised. It was the end of her project, the end of Lunchboxes for Heroes. Anne had spent weeks planning that GoFundMe campaign. The goal was simple and noble: to raise funds to buy high-quality thermal lunchboxes filled with homemade meals and thank-you letters, to deliver to the homeless veterans living in the city parks. She wanted to show them that America hadn't forgotten them. She wanted to be a good citizen, but the radical left does not forgive kindness when it comes dressed in the colors of conservatism. The humiliation didn't come only from the zeroed-out monitors. The true blow, the final stab at her innocence, was projected onto the main wall of the room, dominating the environment. The digital projector buzzed, casting a gigantic image saturated with vibrant colors that seemed to burn the retina. The image was a grotesque mockery: 3 young adults with ironic smiles and perfect teeth, giving thumbs-up signs and pointing while laughing. Behind them, in a crude digital montage, the rainbow flag merged without any subtlety, with the golden symbols of the Soviet hammer and sickle over a blood-red background. It was the celebration of deconstruction. It was the image of the new world, laughing at the traditions of the old world. Anne felt crushed between the reality of the monitors and the mockery of the projection. The attack hadn't just been a technical hack, it was an assault on her soul. Someone, somewhere, with nimble fingers and a heart full of ideological hate, had invaded her account. They didn't just steal the money she had already, with so much effort, managed to raise from neighbors and church friends. They reversed the donations, deleted the messages of support, and replaced her campaign description with manifestos of hatred against toxic nationalism. "Why?" Anne's voice failed, coming out as a raspy whisper. "I just wanted to help. I just wanted." She looked at her empty hands. Hands that should be packing sandwiches for men who fought wars were now trembling, trying uselessly to dry her face. The isolation was absolute. The classroom, which was supposed to be a place of learning and safety, had become an arena where she was the lone gladiator, unarmed and surrounded by invisible lions. The silence of the room was suddenly broken, not by a slamming door, but by the sound of footsteps. Light, rhythmic, almost dancing steps. The steps of someone who feels they own the world. From the shadow of the hallway entered the figure who personified this entire nightmare. He wasn't an anonymous hacker operating from a distant basement. He was right there. It was the community center monitor, a local activist known to everyone as the socialist engineer. A man in his 30s with thick-rimmed glasses, a beard meticulously groomed to look unkempt, and a gaze loaded with arrogant intellectual superiority. He walked slowly between the rows of computers, sliding his hand over the monitors displaying $0 raised, as if caressing hunting trophies. He stopped before the projection on the wall, admiring the hammer and sickle as if they were Renaissance masterpieces, and then, slowly, lowered his gaze to Anne. "Pathetic," he said. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. His voice was calm, polished, the tone of someone who believes they are on the right side of history while committing a moral atrocity. "Did you really think we would allow this here, in this progressive space?" Anne shrank back, hugging her own knees. His presence was physically oppressive. He exuded the scent of expensive coffee and disdain. "It was for the veterans," she sobbed, trying to find a crack of humanity in him. "They are hungry." The leftist no. Engineer laughed. It was a dry, joyless laugh. "Veterans. You mean the agents of imperialism, the tools of global oppression?" He took a step forward, invading the girl's personal space. "We redirected your funds, little girl. The money you raised to feed the armed patriarchy has been donated to bail funds for activists who burn flags. Poetic justice, don't you think?" The cruelty of that revelation hit Anne like a punch to the gut, Mrs. Higgins' money, Mr. Miller's savings, all stolen, all perverted to fund exactly what she and her community feared most. The injustice burned in her throat. She looked up at the face of her tormentor, hoping to see some remorse, but found only the cold fanaticism of someone who had traded compassion for ideology. "You can't do that," she said, her voice gaining a thread of strength born of desperation. "That is theft. That is wrong." "Wrong?" He crouched down, getting to eye level with her, invading her field of vision. His smile vanished, replaced by an expression of contained fury. "Wrong is you coming here with that shirt, spreading this visual hate. You are a provocation, Anne. You and your little MAGA fantasy are the problem. We are just correcting the mistake, cancelling the noise." He stood up and walked to the teacher's control desk. With a theatrical gesture, he typed something on the master keyboard. The sound of laughter in the projection increased in volume, echoing off the empty room's walls, surrounding the girl in a vortex of mockery. Anne covered her ears with her hands, squeezing her eyes shut. She felt small, insignificant, a grain of sand being swept away by a red tide. The world seemed to have turned upside down. Right was wrong, theft was justice, and the victim was the culprit. Anne's vulnerability was total. She was at rock bottom, isolated on an island of conservatism, about to be swallowed by an ocean of radical intolerance. There was nowhere to run. The door was blocked by his presence. The internet, her tool for help, had become her weapon of destruction. There, on the cold floor, the little MAGA girl learned the hardest lesson of her life. Her enemy's ideology had no mercy, no limits, and would not stop until she was broken. And the socialist engineer was just getting started. The cruel laughter echoing from the speakers seemed to have acquired a physical texture, a viscous substance that clung to Anne's skin. She wasn't just down anymore. She was cornered. The socialist Engineer wasn't content with hacking her campaign. He now desired to hack her spirit, dismantle her identity piece by piece, like someone deconstructing an unwanted old machine. He began to walk in circles around her, like a predator studying wounded prey. The rhythmic noise of his shoes on the linoleum acted as a metronome for the girl's rising panic. "Lift your head," he ordered, not with a shout, but with that terrible, authoritative calm of bureaucrats who feel like gods in their little kingdoms. "I want you to look at what you represent." Anne, trembling, lifted her tear-stained face. The engineer pointed an accusing finger, long and thin, straight at her chest. Not at her heart, but at the print on the T-shirt. Trump. "You think that's just a name, don't you?" he began, his voice dripping with intellectual poison. "You think it's just politics, but it's not, Anne. It is a symbol of everything that is wrong with humanity. It is the patriarchy. It is systemic racism. It is the denial of science. It is the worship of borders that shouldn't exist." He gestured frantically, his eyes shining with the fervor of a modern inquisitor. To him, that 14-year-old girl wasn't a child. She was the incarnation of a historical enemy, a living obstacle to the globalist utopia he dreamed of imposing. I have the right." Anne tried to speak, her voice failing, the words of civics she had learned in school seeming fragile against that massive attack. "The First Amendment says I can." "The First Amendment." The engineer let out a shrill laugh, throwing his head back. He seemed genuinely amused by her naivety. "The First Amendment was written by white slave-owning men to protect the speech of white slave-owning men. It doesn't protect hate, Anne, and your existence with that outfit is an act of violence against oppressed minorities." With a sharp movement, he went to the whiteboard next to the projection and, with a thick red marker, wrote a huge word, covering almost the entire board. "Cancelled." "Do you know what this means?" he asked, turning to her, twirling the marker between his fingers like a knife. "It means your life is over, before it even began. We have your data, Anne. Hacking the GoFundMe was just the beginning. We know where your parents work. We know where you go to school. Imagine when the school board finds out you are raising money to promote militarist supremacy. Imagine when your father's employer receives emails saying he's raising a fascist." The blood drained from Anne's face. The terror was now absolute. It wasn't about lunchboxes or veterans anymore. It was about her family's survival. The threat of cancellation, the nuclear weapon of the radical left, was pointed directly at her home. She felt a lump in her throat so tight she could barely breathe. The injustice was suffocating. She hadn't done anything wrong, but she was being treated like a war criminal. "Please," she sobbed, pride giving way to the instinct of family protection. "Leave my parents alone. They are good people. They love America. They love a lie," he shouted, losing his polished composure for a second, revealing the irrational fury bubbling underneath. "There is no good person who votes against progress. There is no innocence in complicity." He walked over to his canvas messenger bag, thrown carelessly on a table, and began rummaging through the contents. Anne seized the moment to try and stand up. Her legs felt like lead, but a spark of indignation lit up in her chest. She remembered her grandfather, the stories he told about courage under enemy fire. "Don't give up," his voice seemed to whisper in her mind. "They can take everything except your honor." Leaning on a chair, Anne pulled herself up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her cheek with mascara and dust, but her blue eyes, now red from crying, fixed on the engineer's back. "You are a bully," she said. Her voice came out low, but steady. The silence in the room seemed to deepen. The hum of the computers ceased for a psychological instant. The engineer stopped. He turned slowly, and what Anne saw in his hands made her heart stop. He was holding a ball of fabric. It wasn't just any cloth. It was an American flag, old and faded, but not by time or honor of battle. It was stained with black ink, intentionally ripped and covered in anarchist slogans written with permanent marker. It was a physical profanation, a rag of hate he held as if it were a sacred trophy. "Bully!" he hissed, walking toward her, closing the distance with every step. "I am an educator, Anne, and you need to learn a lesson about historical humility." He shook the desecrated flag in front of her, dust from the dirty fabric flying into the air. It smelled of mildew and contempt. "This flag," he said, his voice trembling with contained rage, "is the symbol of global oppression, and you, wearing that name, Trump, you are the heiress of this filth. You don't deserve to be heard. Your voice is pollution." Anne backed away, stumbling over a table leg, until her back hit the cold wall under the projection screen. The hammer and sickle shone above her head like a digital guillotine. She was cornered physically and ideologically. "We are going to cleanse this place," the engineer said, lifting the dirty rag with both hands, opening it like a shroud. "If you like this flag so much, maybe you should feel the weight of it, the weight of the crimes it hides." His intention was clear. He was going to cover her head with it. He was going to silence her, humiliate her, turn her into a caricature, a statue covered by the shame he projected onto her. It was the final act of censorship, erasing the face of dissent, suffocating the vision of innocence with the fabric of national betrayal. "No! Stay back!" Anne screamed, holding out her hands to protect herself. But he was bigger, stronger, and driven by a fanatical certainty that knew no moral bounds. "Quiet!" he roared, lunging forward. "Accept your guilt. Accept that your time is up." The shadow of the socialist engineer covered the girl. The dirty fabric hovered over her, blocking the light, blocking hope. Anne closed her eyes, shrinking down, waiting for the repulsive contact of the cloth, waiting for the end of her dignity. She felt she was alone in the universe, abandoned by God and men, a martyr forgotten in a small-town computer lab. Her crying turned into a sharp wail of total despair, the sound of a soul being crushed by the iron boot of a heartless ideology. The triumph of the leftist seemed inevitable. The resistance of the little MAGA girl had been broken. The silence of censorship was about to fall, absolute and terrible, but destiny and American honor operate on their own schedule. The dirty, profaned fabric of the American flag descended like a death sentence upon Anne's head. The smell of chemical ink and mold invaded her nostrils, suffocating her. The socialist engineer smiled, teeth bared in a grimace of sadistic triumph, savoring the moment he would snuff out the light of that little fascist. Anne's world had reduced to that piece of filthy cloth and the approaching darkness. She held her breath, waiting for the end, but the end did not come. What came was thunder. "Take your filthy hands off that child." The voice wasn't just loud, it was seismic. It reverberated through the computer lab walls, making the window panes vibrate and the dust dance in the projector's light beams. It wasn't a scream of hysteria like the activists. It was a battlefield command, forged in artillery fire and tempered by decades of unquestioned authority. The leftist. Engineer froze. The cloth stopped inches from Anne's blonde hair. The smile on his face vanished instantly, replaced by visceral shock. He whipped around toward the door, the movement clumsy with fright. In the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light like a bronze statue brought to life, stood the WWII veteran. Sergeant Major Thomas Iron Miller didn't look like a 98-year-old man. In that moment, age was not a weakness, but armor. He wore his khaki World War II dress uniform, impeccably pressed, every crease sharp as a blade. The gold chevrons on his sleeves caught the light, but it was the medals on his left chest that stole the scene. Rows and rows of colorful ribbons, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, the Victory Medal, formed a shield of honor that shone with an intensity that outshone the communist projection on the wall. He held a dark wooden cane with a silver handle, not as a support for walking, but as a scepter of judgment. I said. The veteran took a step forward. The sound of his boot hitting the linoleum was heavy, definitive. Thud. The cane hit the floor in unison. Clack. Step away from her. Now. The socialist way. Engineer, recovering from the initial shock, tried to summon his usual arrogance. He adjusted his glasses, trying to look superior in front of the elder. "Who are you?" the activist sneered, though his voice had gone up an octave, betraying his nervousness. "You are not authorized to be here. This is a safe space for progressive thought. You are invading a zone free of—" "Shut your mouth!" The veteran didn't shout. He just projected his voice with a coldness that cut through the air conditioning. He kept advancing, ignoring the activist's question as if he were an annoying insect. His eyes, icy blue, were fixed on the dirty rag in the engineer's hands. The veteran stopped just a yard from the aggressor. Despite being shorter due to age, his presence filled the room in such a way that he seemed like a giant looking down at a moral dwarf. "You call that progress?" "Damned!" The veteran pointed the tip of his cane at the desecrated flag in the Leftist's hands. The old soldier's hand didn't tremble. It was steady as a rock. "I saw good men, 18-year-old boys who never got the chance to grow old, get gutted by Nazi mortar shrapnel while holding that flag. I saw their blood dye those stripes a red that you will never, ever have the courage to comprehend." The engineer took a step back, pressured by the intensity of the speech. That is just a symbol of colonialist oppression. You are a dinosaur, a relic of imperialism. Your generation destroyed the planet. He tried to use his keywords, his Twitter slogans, but they sounded hollow and pathetic against the flesh and blood reality in front of him. My generation liberated the world from slavery. The veteran's roar was so intense, the engineer stumbled over his own feet. We crossed the frozen hell of the Ardennes and the fire-swept beaches of Normandy so that you ungrateful parasite, would have the freedom to stand in this air-conditioned room and spit on our heritage. The freedom you used to preach your hate was paid for with the lives of my brothers. With a quick movement surprising for his age, the veteran raised his cane and struck the engineer's hand hard. It wasn't a blow to injure, but to disarm. The activist, caught off guard and cowed, dropped the dirty cloth. The desecrated flag fell to the floor, crumpled like trash. "You are not worthy to hold it," the veteran said with disgust, "not even to destroy it." The candid socialist engineer rubbed his hand, more shocked than hurt. He looked around, seeking support, but he was alone. The narrative of power he had built had been shattered. He looked at the projection screen, where the hammer and sickle still glowed, and then at the veteran's chest. The comparison was brutal. Paper ideology versus real sacrifice. "This is assault!" the engineer squealed, retreating until he bumped into the teacher's desk. He whipped his phone out of his pocket, hands trembling. "I'm recording! You're going to get cancelled! I'm calling the administration! This is a hate crime against an educator!" "Call them," challenged the veteran, without breaking eye contact. "Call whoever you want, but while you type your lies, know this: the tyranny you worship, the censorship you try to impose on this girl, that doesn't work on free men. You can hack computers, son, but you can't hack the American soul." The beastly leftist. Realizing his digital threat had no effect on this analog man, felt real panic. He was facing something he couldn't deconstruct, something that didn't fit into his academic theories, the truth. Morally defeated, He grabbed his messenger bag, casting furtive, poison-filled glances at the old man and the girl. "This isn't over," he hissed, scurrying toward the door, dodging the veteran as if he were radioactive. "You will pay. The board will hear about this. The system will crush you." With the coward's flight of the aggressor, silence returned to the room. But now it wasn't an oppressive silence. It was the sacred silence that follows an answered prayer. The WWII veteran let out a long sigh, his rigid posture relaxing slightly. The fury of the warrior gave way to the tenderness of a grandfather. He turned slowly to Anne, who was still huddled against the wall, eyes wide, unable to process the miracle she had just witnessed. He said nothing immediately. He just leaned his cane against the nearest table and extended both hands to her. Wrinkled hands, stained by sun and time, but open and welcoming. "It's all right now, little one," he said, his voice now a soft, deep rumble. "The enemy has retreated. The perimeter is secure." Anne looked at him and then at the Trump t-shirt she was wearing, the cause of all her suffering. "He said that I was wrong," she sobbed, tears returning, but now from relief. "He said I should be ashamed." The veteran shook his head, an expression of pain and compassion crossing his weathered face. He lowered himself with difficulty, ignoring the pain in his old knees, to get to her level. "Look at my medals, child," he whispered, touching the purple heart. "Every single one of them tells a story of someone who fought so you could be exactly who you are. Ashamed of loving your country, ashamed of wanting to help our veterans." "No." He wiped a tear from her face with a rough thumb. "Shame is what that man carries, even if he doesn't know it. You, my dear, carry the torch, and the torch is heavy sometimes, and sometimes the fire burns, but you must never let it drop." Anne, feeling a wave of gratitude so great her chest felt like it would explode, launched herself into the old soldier's arms. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in the rough wool of his uniform, smelling mothballs, old tobacco, and safety. The veteran wrapped her in his arms, patting her back clumsily but affectionately. But while he comforted her, the veteran's eyes drifted up to the wall. The projection with the hammer and sickle was still there, mocking them, and the monitors still showed $0 raised. The enemy had fled, but the damage was done. The system was still against them. The threat of institutional cancellation hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Let's get you up," said the veteran, feeling the weight of responsibility. "We have a battle to finish, and soldiers don't stay on the ground." He helped her stand. Anne, still fragile, held his arm as if it were an anchor. The veteran looked at the nearest computer screen, where the hacked campaign displayed failure. His eyes narrowed. The kinetic war had ended in 1945, but the culture war was just beginning, and he didn't intend to lose this battle either. Sergeant Major Thomas Iron Miller was not a man to leave the battlefield before victory was assured. With the room now quiet, free of the activists' toxic noise, he turned to the task of reconstruction. He walked to the main desk, where the teacher's computer still controlled the projector. With a decisive strike of his cane on the power button, the image of the hammer and sickle flickered and died, plunging the wall into a clean, peaceful whiteness. "The first rule of war, young lady," said the veteran, turning to Anne, "is to clear the ground. Never build your base on the enemy's filth." Anne nodded, wiping away the last tears. She felt different now. The fear had evaporated, replaced by reverent admiration. That man hadn't just saved her physically, he had restored her backbone. The veteran reached into the inside pocket of his uniform and, to Anne's surprise, pulled out a modern smartphone. The technology looked strange in his war-calloused hands, but he handled it with purpose. "That coward thinks he controls the digital world," the veteran muttered, swiping his finger across the screen with determination. "He forgot that we, the people, own this country. He zeroed your account?" Let's see what the old guard has to say about that. He pulled up the girl's GoFundMe page. The $0 raised still mocked them. Without hesitating, the veteran typed in his bank details. His fingers didn't tremble as he entered the amount. He pressed donate. On the monitor in front of Anne, the number changed instantly, from $0 to $1,000. "That's my pension," he said, winking at her, "and it's the best investment I've made since I bought war bonds in '44, but that's just the ignition. We need fuel." He motioned for Anne to come closer. "Come here, let's take a picture. I want the world to see the face of courage." Anne straightened her Trump t-shirt, no longer afraid but puffing out her chest with renewed pride. She stood next to the veteran. He put his arm around her shoulders, a khaki wall of protection. He raised the phone and took a selfie. In the photo, her young, hopeful face contrasted with his lined, firm face, united by the same indomitable spirit. "Now post it," he ordered, sending the photo to her. "Right, they tried to silence us. They tried to erase our history, but the veteran says America never surrenders. Support our heroes." Anne obeyed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She posted on Twitter, on Instagram, on everything. She tagged patriot influencers, veterans pages, community groups. There was a minute of silence. Then the first notification ding sounded on her phone. Then another, and another. In seconds, the sound of notifications turned into a continuous melody, a digital chorus of solidarity. Anne looked at the monitor. The progress bar began to move. 1's, 50. 2, 300. 5, 1000s. Money poured in at breakneck speed. Messages began scrolling on the screen, replacing the hacker's hate speech. From a Marine in Texas, "Keep the faith, girl." Mom of 3 in Florida, "No one messes with our patriot kids." Trucker from Ohio, "We stand with you. God bless America." In 10 minutes, Anne's original goal had not only been reached, but tripled. The Socialistas engineer's petty plan had backfired spectacularly. By trying to silence her, he had given her a global megaphone. The cancellation had failed. The consecration had begun. Anne looked at the veteran, eyes shining with disbelief. "We won. We really won." The veteran smiled, a smile that lit up the trenches of his wrinkles. "Never doubt America, Anne. The loud minority might control the classrooms and the newspapers for now, but the silent majority, we are the foundation. And when the foundation shakes, their house of cards falls." He picked up his cane and headed for the door. "My work here is done. The perimeter is secure. The lunchboxes will be bought. The veterans will be fed." Anne ran to him and hugged him one last time. "Thank you. For everything. How can I thank you?" The sergeant major stopped, looked deeply into her eyes, and straightened his posture, rendering a slow, solemn salute to her, not to a superior officer, but to an equal in spirit. "Just keep wearing that shirt, kid," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and never, ever apologize for loving your country. Freedom is a flame that needs to be passed on. Today, I passed mine to you. Don't let it go out." With that, he turned and marched down the community center hallway, his silhouette disappearing into the afternoon sunlight streaming through the front door. He walked not like a tired old man, but like a guardian who had done his duty. Anne stood alone in the room, but she was no longer lonely. The monitor glowed behind her, illuminating the room with the light of success and charity. She looked at the white wall, where the symbol of hate had been. In her mind, she saw only stars and stripes. She grabbed her backpack, raised her head, and walked out of the room. The world outside might be hostile, the media might lie, and teachers might try to indoctrinate. But she knew the truth now. She had the blessing of history. She was a little MAGA girl, protected by the shield of truth, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could stop her. Ideological tyranny had lost. Freedom, simple, pure, and American, had triumphed.